I left the plant earlier than usual. Without calling ahead, I drove my wife, Eleanor, to our son George's house. I wanted to surprise him and tell him about the new logistics firm I'd just acquired. When we arrived, I saw cars lining the street, the lawn covered in blue and pink balloons, and a huge banner that read, "Welcome our little miracle." I rang the doorbell. My son opened the door, looked at me, and said coldly, "I didn't think I needed to notify you." From the entryway, I could see my daughter-in-law and her parents celebrating. That's when I understood. We weren't welcome. George's words stabbed into my chest like frozen daggers. It wasn't what he said, but how he said it, with that calculated indifference, that barely disguised scorn. My first grandchild had come into the world, and I, Augustus Sterling, the respected founder and CEO of Sterling Manufacturing, the undisputed patriarch of the Sterling family, hadn't even been considered worthy of knowing. Eleanor, my wife of 40 years, squeezed my hand hard. I felt her tense beside me, ready to turn around and leave, with her dignity intact. But something inside me refused to grant them that easy victory. At 68 years old, I had learned that decisive moments rarely announce their arrival. They show up disguised in everyday situations, and this, without a doubt, was one of them. "I understand," I replied, with a calm that surprised even myself. "Can we meet our grandson, at least?" A flicker of hesitation crossed my son's face. That same face that so resembled mine when I was his age, 35. Yet, he was a stranger standing on the threshold of a life I had helped build. "I suppose, since you're already here," he finally said, stepping aside without enthusiasm to let us pass. As we crossed the foyer of that house we had helped them purchase, I felt the stares. My daughter-in-law, Camille's look, was a mixture of surprise and discomfort. Her parents, the Mondells, held that poorly disguised air of superiority they always exhibited toward us, the self-made family, the ones without generations of established wealth. And the various friends and relatives of Camille, occupying the living room, were all clearly disconcerted by our unexpected appearance. In the center of the room, in an elaborate cradle I had never seen before, slept my grandson, my first grandson. A small bundle, wrapped in a blue blanket with silver trim, oblivious to the tension saturating the air around him. The awkward silence stretched for seconds that felt like forever, until Eleanor, always braver than me in social situations, advanced toward the cradle. "He's beautiful," she said softly, leaning over to get a better look at the baby. "What is his name?" "Miles," Camille replied, stepping closer as if to shield her child from some invisible danger. "Miles Mondell Sterling." Another blow. He didn't even carry the Sterling name first, as was our family's tradition. The message was clear. This child belonged more to the Mondell family than to ours. "A strong name," I commented, refusing to show how much this new affront affected me. "Named after his maternal grandfather, I presume?" Mr. Theodore Mondell, standing by the window with a glass of champagne, nodded with obvious satisfaction. The Mondell patriarch, with his perfectly combed silver hair and bespoke suit, represented everything I supposedly was not: refinement, old education, social connections that stretched back generations. "It was Camille's idea," George interjected, trying to distance himself from the decision. "I just agreed." "Of course, Nan," I replied, recognizing a familiar pattern in my son. Always yielding to the Mondells, always seeking their approval, as if his own name wasn't enough. It all started 8 years ago when George, fresh out of the Wharton School of Business with his MBA, met Camille at a charity gala. She, the only daughter of the Mondells, a family with a tradition in private banking, was finishing her master's degree in finance. They were the perfect couple on paper. Young, attractive, educated, with promising futures. Except for one detail, me. It wasn't that the Mondells were explicitly derogatory. They were too refined for that. It was more subtle. The way Mr. Mondell always asked about my small factory. As if Sterling Manufacturing, with its 3 plants and over 200 employees, was nothing but a local workshop. Or how Mrs. Patricia Mondell discreetly corrected Eleanor's accent when she used expressions that were too colorful for their taste. But we endured it for George, our only son, the pride of our life, the first Sterling to get a university education, to speak perfect English, to travel the world. We had raised him to exceed our own limits, hadn't we? And if that meant entering a world that looked down its nose at us, so be it. The wedding day was when I truly understood what was happening. The event, entirely planned by the Mondells at their family estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, was a display of calculated opulence. 500 guests, most of whom were unknown to us. Eleanor and I found ourselves relegated to a side table, far from the head table, where the Mondells presided over the celebration, as if they were the only parents of the couple. "Don't worry, honey," Eleanor told me that night, noticing my discomfort. "It's different customs. It doesn't mean anything." But it meant everything. They were establishing the natural order of things according to their vision. The Mondells on top, the Sterlings below, and George, our son, seemed to accept it without question. After the wedding, the snubs continued. Family dinners were always at the Mondells' house, never ours. Vacations were always with them, never with us. Important decisions, where to live, which car to buy, what to invest in, were always discussed with Mr. Mondell, rarely with me, even though my business experience was just as valid as his. Slowly, our son drifted away. Visits to our house became more spaced out, calls shorter, excuses more elaborate. We're very busy. Camille has a major project. We have unavoidable social commitments. And yet, we continued to support them. When they decided to buy a house, we gave them the full down payment. When George wanted to leave his executive job to launch his own venture, I backed him financially without question. When they needed a new car because the old one didn't adequately reflect their position, Eleanor sold some of her mother's jewelry to cover the difference. We did everything out of love, hoping that someday our son would remember where he came from, who we really were, the effort it took to give him the opportunities he enjoyed. 6 months ago, during one of their rare visits, Camille announced they were expecting their first child. The news lit up our lives. A grandson, the continuation of our lineage, an opportunity to experience the joy of watching a little Sterling grow again. "We'll be right here," Eleanor promised, already mentally planning the nursery we would prepare in our house for when the baby visited. "And of course, whatever you need, we're here," I added, thinking of the new savings account I would open for the child's future. "Thank you, but we have everything covered," Camille replied with that polite but distant smile. "Dad is already setting up a trust fund for the baby, and Mom will be handling the nursery in their house for when we need help." The implication was clear. They didn't need our help. They didn't want our involvement. We were the secondary grandparents, the dispensable ones. In the following months, information about the pregnancy trickled out to us, always through brief calls or short messages. We were never invited to any doctor's visit, ultrasound, or prenatal celebration. When Eleanor suggested hosting a baby shower, Camille politely declined, informing us that her mother was already planning it and that it would be an intimate affair just for close friends and immediate family. And now, this. The baby had been born, and we hadn't even been notified. While everyone else celebrated the arrival of little Miles, we had been deliberately excluded from this crucial moment. "When was he born?" Eleanor asked, her voice betraying her contained emotion. "3 days ago," George replied, avoiding eye contact. "It all happened very quickly." 3 days, Eleanor repeated. "And you didn't think your parents might want to know immediately?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. The guests pretended not to hear, suddenly focusing on their drinks or forced conversations among themselves. "And we were very busy with the doctors and the paperwork," George began. "It was a complicated delivery," Camille interrupted, her tone suggesting we were being insensitive for questioning their silence. "We needed time to adjust, to rest." "Of course," Eleanor conceded, always the diplomat. "The important thing is that both of you are well now." "Can I get a closer look at him?" I asked, moving toward the cradle where my grandson slept. Camille exchanged a quick glance with her mother, who nodded slightly. "Sure," she replied, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I leaned over the cradle and looked at my grandson's face for the first time. His brow was furrowed, as if concentrating on some important dream, and his small fists were clenched against his chest. I immediately recognized George's chin, the same one he had inherited from me, and something in the shape of his eyes reminded me of my father. A knot formed in my throat. This tiny being carried my blood, continued my lineage, yet they had decided I didn't deserve to be a part of his arrival into the world. "He's identical to you when you were a baby," Eleanor told George, who remained silent, as if the comparison made him uncomfortable. "Everyone says he looks more like the Mondell side," Mrs. Mondell commented, approaching. "He has Theodore's nose, and definitely Camille's eyes." "Sterling features are strong," I replied, straightening up to my full height. "They may take a while to appear, but they always do." A tense silence followed my comment. Mr. Mondell then approached with that studied elegance he always exhibited. "Augustus, Eleanor, what a surprise to have you here," he said, as if he had only just noticed our presence. "We were planning to call you tomorrow to share the happy news. Camille needed these first few days to recover properly." 3 days, Eleanor corrected softly. 3 days without knowing our grandson had been born. "Time flies when you're busy with a newborn," Mrs. Mondell interjected, downplaying the issue. "We've barely slept, organizing everything to ensure Camille and the baby have everything they need." "I understand," I said, even though I understood nothing. Why was it so difficult for them to send a simple text message? "And everything went well with the delivery? No complications? Nothing serious?" Camille replied, sitting on the sofa as if our conversation exhausted her. "It was just longer than expected." 36 hours, Mrs. Mondell added proudly, as if the merit were hers. "My daughter is a warrior." "That must have been very difficult," Eleanor commented, approaching Camille with genuine concern. "Are you getting enough rest? When George was born, I could barely move for the first few days." "I have all the support I need," Camille replied, looking toward her mother. "Mom has practically moved in with us this week." Another stab. The message was clear. The valuable, necessary grandmother was Mrs. Mondell. Eleanor was dispensable, her experience and support unnecessary. "We could help too," I ventured to suggest. "Our house is closer than your parents', Camille. And Eleanor has experience with babies, not just with George, but with her nieces and nephews too." An awkward silence followed my offer. George looked at Camille, who in turn looked at her mother in that strange hierarchy they seemed to have established. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Sterling," Camille finally replied, "but we have everything organized. My mother is staying this week, and then my Aunt Constance, who is a nurse, is coming. We don't want to cause you unnecessary inconvenience." Helping to care for our grandson would never be an inconvenience, Eleanor replied, her voice firm despite the obvious disappointment. Of course not, Mr. Mondell intervened, adopting a conciliatory tone. And there will be many opportunities for everyone to share time with little Miles. But these first few days are crucial for establishing routines, and too many people intervening could be counterproductive. Too many people? Eleanor repeated quietly. I understand. The tension in the room was palpable. The other guests, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, began to discreetly say their goodbyes. In less than 10 minutes, the room had almost completely emptied, leaving only us, the Mondells, George, and Camille. I think we should leave too, Eleanor finally said, always intuitive. Camille needs to rest, and our visit was unexpected. We appreciate you coming, Mrs. Mondell replied, with that hollow courtesy so characteristic of her. I'm sure George will call you tomorrow to arrange a more planned visit. I was preparing to say goodbye when the baby began to cry. A potent, demanding wail filled the room, interrupting the exit the Mondells were so eager to facilitate. Instinctively, Eleanor moved toward the cradle. 35 years had passed since we had George, but those maternal reflexes were still intact in her. Let me help you, she said to Camille, who had also gotten up to attend to the baby. It's not necessary, my daughter-in-law replied, placing herself between Eleanor and the cradle with a swiftness that was almost offensive. I'll take care of it. Eleanor backed away as if she had been slapped. Camille picked up the baby with evident awkwardness, rocking him with stiff movements, while the little one continued to cry louder. Maybe he's hungry, Mrs. Mondell suggested, approaching. Do you want me to prepare the bottle? Let me try to soothe him first, Camille replied, visibly exhausted and inexperienced. The baby's crying continued to grow louder. Camille seemed increasingly nervous, and the atmosphere in the room tightened by the second. May I? Eleanor asked softly, extending her arms toward her grandson. Sometimes a baby just needs different arms for a moment. Camille hesitated, looking at her mother again for approval. Mrs. Mondell frowned but nodded slightly, perhaps recognizing that the situation was becoming uncomfortable for everyone. With evident reluctance, Camille handed the baby to Eleanor, who took him with the confidence that only years of experience provide. She immediately began to rock him with soft, rhythmic movements, whispering soothing words near his small ear. To everyone's astonishment, especially the Mondells, the baby began to calm down. His crying gradually diminished into small hiccups, and finally into a satisfied silence as he nestled against his paternal grandmother's chest. You have the magic touch, I commented proudly, watching my wife hold our grandson for the first time. It's just practice, she replied humbly, though her eyes shone with emotion, and knowing the different types of cries. This one was from discomfort, not hunger. He probably just needed a change of position. The tension on Camille's face was evident. She was witnessing another woman, especially one she had relegated to the background, instantly connecting with her son in a way she herself hadn't managed. I think he's calmer now, she finally said, holding out her arms to take back her baby. Thank you for the help. Eleanor returned little Miles to his mother with visible reluctance. For a brief moment, while holding our grandson, I had seen her face light up with a joy I hadn't observed in her for a long time. You're welcome, she replied softly. He has a calm temperament, just like George did when he was a baby. He rarely cried without reason. George, who had remained strangely silent throughout the episode, seemed uncomfortable at the mention of his own childhood. It's late, he said abruptly, and Camille needs to rest. I understood the hint. It was time for us to leave. Of course, I replied, taking Eleanor's hand. We just wanted to meet our grandson. Now that we have, we'll take our leave. We appreciate the visit, Mrs. Mondell said with that mechanical courtesy, "and we apologize for not informing you sooner. As you can appreciate, these have been very intense days." "We understand perfectly," I replied, though it wasn't true. I understood nothing of what was happening. This deliberate exclusion, this invisible barrier they had built between us and our own son. We said goodbye with the formality of strangers, promising to call before our next visit. As we walked toward our car, I felt the weight of what had happened finally settle onto my shoulders. "What did we do wrong, Eleanor?" I asked, when we were alone, my voice slightly breaking. "At what point did we lose our son?" Eleanor remained silent for a few moments, her gaze lost on the house we were leaving behind. "I don't know if it was us," she finally replied. "Maybe it's the world he chose to live in, a world where people like us don't fit in so easily." "People like us," I repeated bitterly. "Hard-working, honest people who built everything from scratch. Is that what he's ashamed of now?" "I don't know, Augustus," Eleanor sighed. "I only know that we can't force him to respect us or love us as we deserve. That respect is earned, not demanded." Her words echoed in my head the entire drive back. Respect. The foundation of any meaningful relationship. The respect I thought I had earned with decades of sacrifice, hard work, and unconditional love. The respect that apparently was worth nothing in the Mondells' world. When we arrived at our house, the house we had built with so much effort, I sat in my favorite armchair and looked at the family photographs adorning the walls. George, as a baby, a boy, a teenager, an adult. A lifetime captured in images that seemed to belong to another reality. A family that no longer existed. It was then that I made a decision. I would not be humiliated again. I would not allow my own son, the person for whom I would have given my life without hesitation, to treat me like a dispensable stranger. I would not let the Mondells define my worth as a father, a grandfather, or a man. It was time to remind everyone who Augustus Sterling truly was. The opportunity came sooner than expected. 2 days after our unfortunate discovery, I received a call from George. His tone was formal, distant, as if he were talking to a work colleague and not his father. "Dad, we're organizing Miles's christening for next month," he informed me without preamble. "I wanted to confirm the date so you can pencil it in." "A month?" I asked, surprised. "That's quite soon, isn't it? The Mondells have a tradition of christening newborns before they turn 2 months old," he explained, as if I should know the ancestral customs of a family that clearly considered me inferior. "And Mr. Mondell already spoke to the bishop to reserve St. Bartholomew's Church." "St. Bartholomew's," I repeated, assimilating the information. "I see. And what will our role be in this ceremony?" An awkward silence preceded his answer. "Well, the godparents will be Mr. Mondell's brother and his wife. They've been very close to Camille since she was a child." You'll be seated in the first pew, of course." "Of course," I replied, carefully controlling my tone. "And the reception will be at the Willow Creek Country Club. Mr. Mondell is a founding member and secured the main ballroom, even though it's usually reserved years in advance." Every word was further confirmation of what I already knew. The Mondells were orchestrating everything, using their connections, their status, to demonstrate who held the real power in this relationship. "Sounds splendid," I commented. "It must be costly." Another awkward silence. "Mr. Mondell insisted on taking care of everything," George finally replied. "He says it's tradition for the maternal family to host the first grandchild's christening." "First time I have heard that tradition," I responded, not bothering to hide my skepticism. "But since Mr. Mondell is so generous, I wouldn't want to interfere." "Dad!" George began with that condescending tone he had adopted lately. It's not about generosity. It's simply how things are done in their circle. Their circle, I repeated. A circle where apparently your parents have no place? That's not it, he protested weakly. It's just that they have certain traditions, certain protocols. Protocols that include excluding the paternal grandparents from the birth of their grandson. I replied, unable to contain my bitterness. I understand perfectly, son. An exasperated sigh on the other end of the line. I don't want to argue over the phone, Dad. I was just calling to confirm the date. It's August 15th at 11 in the morning. Can you attend or not? Of course we'll attend, I replied, with a calm I didn't feel. We wouldn't miss the christening of our only grandson for anything in the world. Fine. I'll send you the formal invitation next week when they're ready. We'll be waiting, I replied. And George? Your mother and I want to be part of Miles's life. Truly. Significantly, not just as guests at formal events organized by the Mondells. Another, longer silence. I'll talk to Camille about it. He finally replied, non-committally. Do it, I insisted. Because this child carries Sterling blood, whether Mr. Mondell likes it or not, and the Sterlings never abandon their own. I hung up before he could respond. My heart was pounding, a mix of indignation, sadness, and determination swirling in my chest. Eleanor, who had heard my side of the conversation, looked at me with an expression that mixed concern and pride. What are you planning to do? She asked, knowing me well enough to sense something brewing in my mind. Remind everyone who we really are, I replied, my voice firm for the first time in days, starting with our own son. I picked up my phone again and dialed a number I rarely used. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. Morales and Associates Law Firm. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, counselor. This is Augustus Sterling. I need to make some changes to my will and the ownership structure of my companies. When could you see me? For you, there's always time, Mr. Sterling. How does first thing tomorrow morning sound? Perfect, I replied. There are family matters that require legal clarity. When I hung up, Eleanor watched me with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. You're not going to do anything drastic, are you? She asked cautiously. Only what's necessary, I replied, feeling a new energy course through my body. What is fair and necessary, so that everyone understands that respect isn't bought with surnames or social connections. It's earned through actions, integrity, and loyalty. That night, while Eleanor slept beside me, I stayed awake, planning every detail of what was to come. It wouldn't be a petty revenge or an emotional outburst. It would be a carefully calibrated lesson about the consequences of forgetting where we come from and to whom we owe what we are. Because I, Augustus Sterling, had built an empire from the ground up with these hands that were once calloused from hard labor. And no one, not even my own son, would make me feel less for it. Respect, as they were about to learn, is not taken for granted. Sometimes it must be remembered in ways no one can ignore. The following morning dawned with that clear, brilliant clarity so characteristic of a mid-Atlantic summer. As I prepared for my meeting with Counselor Morales, I felt strangely calm, as if the storm of emotions from the previous days had settled into a crystal-clear determination. Do you want me to come with you? Eleanor asked as we shared breakfast. I'd rather you go look for a gift for the baby, I replied. We need something special, something that represents who we really are. Eleanor studied me with that penetrating gaze that always seemed to read my deepest thoughts. It's not just a legal restructuring you're planning, is it? It's a redefinition, I replied, after considering it for a moment. Of who we are as a family, of our values, of our legacy. Don't do anything irreversible, Augustus, she warned gently. Wounded pride is a poor counselor. It's not pride, I corrected. Though maybe it's a little of that too. It's dignity, something we should never have allowed them to take from us. Counselor Morales received me in his office with that discreet efficiency I had always appreciated. At his age, he was one of those old-school lawyers, discreet, meticulous, and absolutely loyal to his lifelong clients. Mr. Sterling, he greeted, shaking my hand firmly. Tell me how I can help you. For the next hour, I meticulously outlined the changes I wanted to implement. It wasn't about disinheriting George or taking impulsive punitive measures. It was something subtler, more strategic, and in a way, deeper. Essentially, I want to create 3 separate entities, I explained, showing him a diagram I had prepared. The first, an irrevocable educational trust for my grandson, controlled exclusively by Eleanor and me until he turns 25 years old. Counselor Morales took detailed notes, nodding occasionally. The second, I continued, a family foundation that will channel 30% of the profits from all my companies toward educational and community development projects in West Philadelphia, where I started my first business. And the third entity? The lawyer asked, lifting his gaze from his notes. A restructuring of Sterling Manufacturing, I replied, handing him another document. I want to divide it into 5 independent operating units, each with its own board of directors and ownership structure. Counselor Morales studied the documents with professional attention. This is quite complex, Mr. Sterling, he commented finally, and it will have significant fiscal and operational implications. May I ask the main objective of these changes? Clarity, I replied simply. I want it to be absolutely clear what values the Sterling Ventures represent, who makes the decisions, and how the profits will eventually be distributed. I understand, he said, though his expression suggested he sensed more personal motivations behind my request. And what will be your son's role in this new structure? George will retain his current position as Director of International Operations, I explained, but he will now report to a board of directors where he will have only 1 vote out of 7. That will significantly dilute his decision-making capacity, the lawyer observed. Exactly, I confirmed. Important decisions will require consensus, not unilateral imposition. We continued refining the legal details for another hour. Counselor Morales, always professional, did not ask personal questions, although I occasionally perceived his curiosity when a particularly restrictive aspect came up in the conversation. How long will it take to implement these changes? I asked finally. For the basic structure, approximately 2 weeks, he replied after calculating mentally. For the full implementation, including fiscal and regulatory aspects, between 1 and 2 months. I need the first phase to be ready before August 15th, I specified. Your grandson's christening is important, the counselor commented, surprising me with his perceptiveness. Seeing my expression, he clarified, my wife is friends with Mrs. Mondell's sister. The city's social circles are smaller than they seem. I see, I replied, remembering that even in a metropolis of millions, the elites has always found ways to stay connected. Will it be possible to meet that deadline? With absolute priority, yes, he confirmed. My team will work exclusively on this. When I said goodbye to Counselor Morales, I felt that peculiar mix of relief and determination that accompanies momentous decisions. It wasn't revenge I was seeking, I repeated to myself as I drove back home. It was justice, clarity, and necessary redefinition of the terms under which our family would operate from now on. The following days were filled with constant activity. While the legal team worked on the restructuring, Eleanor and I focused on preparing for our own offensive on the family front. First, the baby's room. We transformed one of the empty bedrooms in our house into a perfectly equipped nursery. It featured a cherry wood crib hand-carved by artisans from North Carolina, a musical mobile that played classic jazz standards, and a restored antique rocking chair that had belonged to my mother. "Is this too much?" Eleanor asked as we looked at the finished room. "We don't even know if they'll allow the child to stay with us." "They will allow it," I replied with a certainty I didn't know exactly where it came from. "Because we are going to change the rules of the game." Then came the gifts. We didn't opt for the ostentation that would surely characterize the Mondel's presence. Instead, we chose meaning and tradition. A gold medallion engraved with the Sterling family crest, which had passed down through generations since my grandfather. A book of African American folk tales with original illustrations, commissioned specifically for Miles. And most importantly, a meticulously compiled album that narrated the Sterling family history. From my humble beginnings as a poor son in West Philadelphia to the present, documenting with photographs and newspaper clippings the ascent of a family forged by honest work, perseverance, and unbreakable values. "This is beautiful," Eleanor commented, carefully turning the pages of the album. "Our complete story, without frills or pretense. Our true legacy," I added, "not just companies or property, but examples of life, of overcoming, of integrity." We also arranged a visit to the small Baptist church where George had been christened 35 years ago. Pastor Johnson, elderly but with his memory intact, received us with the affection of one who had witnessed the most important moments of our family life. "So now you're a grandfather, Augustus?" he asked with that knowing smile that had always comforted me in difficult times. Life has wonderful ways of reminding us of our purpose in this world. "Sometimes it also has painful ways, Pastor," I replied, briefly sharing the situation with our son. The elderly pastor listened attentively, nodding occasionally, his eyes revealing deep comprehension without needing many words. "Respect is like a delicate plant," he commented when I finished my story. "It requires constant care, but it also knows when it is being neglected. Sometimes it needs severe pruning to bloom again with all its strength." "Do you think I'm doing the right thing?" I asked, seeking not so much approval as understanding from someone whose wisdom I had always valued. "I think you are doing what is necessary," he replied after considering it. "There are moments in life where we must remind those around us who we really are, not out of pride, but out of truth." His words stayed with me for days, echoing in my mind as a validation of what my instinct already knew. This severe pruning was necessary for our family to heal and eventually bloom again. 1 week after our visit to the lawyer, we received the formal christening invitation via courier, a thick envelope of imported paper with the Mondel monogram engraved in gold relief. Inside was an elaborate card announcing the sacrament of baptism for Miles Mondel Sterling, with all the details George had already given us by phone. What caught my attention, however, was the handwritten note attached in Mrs. Mondel's elegant calligraphy. "Dear Augustus and Eleanor, for the ceremony, we suggest formal attire, gentlemen in dark suits and ladies preferably in pastel tones. The closest family will be wearing the traditional Mondel colors, navy blue for gentlemen and sky blue for ladies. As you can appreciate, being a social event of some relevance, a specific protocol has been established for photographs and the seating arrangements during the ceremony, which will be explained upon your arrival. Sincerely, Patricia Mondel." Eleanor read the note over my shoulder, her expression gradually transforming from incredulity to contained indignation. "Specific protocol?" she repeated, her voice trembling with emotion.
Who do they think they are? The royal family. It's their way of establishing control, I replied, surprisingly calm. A subtle way of reminding us that in their eyes, we are second-class guests in the life of our own grandson. And we're just going to accept it, just like that? Eleanor asked, her usual diplomacy momentarily overshadowed by indignation. Of course not, I replied, allowing a small smile to appear on my face. In fact, we're going to respond appropriately. That same afternoon, I contacted the best stationer in the city and ordered our own cards with the Sterling family crest delicately engraved. The note I dictated to accompany our christening gift was simple but unequivocal. Dear grandson Miles, with the blessing of baptism, you begin a path of faith and values. As your paternal grandparents, we want to accompany you every step of the way with the love and wisdom that only experience can give. We gift you this medallion that has belonged to 5 generations of Sterlings, men and women who built their destiny with honest work, integrity, and courage, values that we are sure will also forge your character. Always remember that you carry the blood of those who never gave up, of those who transformed difficulties into opportunities, of those who made respect and family loyalty their moral compass. With infinite love, your Sterling grandparents. It's perfect, Eleanor commented after reading it. Direct, but elegant. A subtle, but powerful reminder. It's only the beginning, I replied. The day of the christening will be when they truly understand the full message. 3 days before the ceremony, I received the call I had been waiting for. Counselor Morales confirmed that the first phase of the restructuring was complete, and the documents were ready for my review and signature. Everything has been implemented according to your specifications, he explained as we reviewed the papers in his office. The trust fund for your grandson is established with the exact parameters you requested. The family foundation has been legally constituted with you and your wife as sole lifetime administrators, and the corporate restructuring has been registered with the appropriate authorities. Excellent work, I acknowledged, signing the last document. And what about the letter for George? Here it is, he replied, handing me a sealed envelope. It contains the formal notification of the implemented changes, as well as the invitation to the new board of directors meeting scheduled for next week. I tucked the envelope into my briefcase, knowing exactly when and how I would deliver it. One last question, Counselor, I said before leaving. In practical terms, what is the immediate impact of these changes for my son? The lawyer carefully considered his answer, rearranging some documents on his desk. In practical terms, Mr. Sterling, your son retains his executive position and his current salary. However, he no longer has unilateral authority to make strategic decisions, approve budgets above a certain amount, or represent the company in international negotiations without the board's approval. And in terms of future patrimony, I insisted. The succession plan has been completely modified, he explained. He will no longer directly inherit majority control of the companies, but rather minority stakes in each operating unit, with specific performance and conduct clauses that must be met to maintain those stakes. Perfect, I replied, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. It's exactly what I was looking for. Stepping out of the office, I paused on the sidewalk, contemplating the bustle of the city I loved so much, the city that had given me so much. A city that had witnessed my ascent from a young, resourceless entrepreneur to a respected businessman. A city that would now witness how I defended the dignity and values that had underpinned that ascent. The morning of the christening dawned clear and bright, as if even the weather wanted to cooperate with the scenic perfection the Mondells had undoubtedly meticulously planned. Eleanor looked spectacular in a deeply colored coral suit, deliberately moving away from the sky blue suggested by Mrs. Mondell, complemented by a pearl necklace.
that had belonged to her mother. I opted for a light gray suit, also in conscious deviation from the indicated dress code, with a tie in the traditional colors of West Philadelphia, my home. Ready to ruffle some peacock feathers? I joked as we got into the car. Eleanor smiled, that knowing, complicit smile we had always shared in the disjunctive moments of our lives. More than ready, she replied, carefully arranging the box containing our gifts for Miles, and it's time to remind them that the Sterlings may not have 5 generations of bankers, but we have something much more valuable. And what is that? I asked, though I knew the answer perfectly. Authenticity, she replied simply. Something that cannot be bought with surnames or social connections. St. Bartholomew's Church, imposing as always, was particularly crowded that morning. Upon arriving, a young man in a formal suit and holding a tablet intercepted us at the entrance. Names, please, he asked with professional distance. Augustus and Eleanor Sterling, I replied. The paternal grandparents. He consulted his list, scrolling his finger across the screen until he found us. Ah, yes, your location is in the second pew, on the right side. Second pew? Eleanor interrupted with a dangerous calm. There must be a mistake. We are the paternal grandparents. The young man seemed uncomfortable, consulting his tablet again. I'm sorry, ma'am. These are the assignments approved by the Mondell family. The first pew is reserved for the godparents and the maternal grandparents. I exchanged a glance with Eleanor, who nodded almost imperceptibly. It was exactly the kind of situation we had anticipated. I understand, I replied, with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Of course, we will respect the established protocols. We advanced into the church, where several dozen guests were already gathered. Most, we immediately noticed, belonged to the Mondell social circle, bankers, prominent business owners, people whose faces regularly appeared in the society pages, but who rarely mixed with the self-made like us. Mr. Mondell and Mrs. Mondell, perfectly dressed in the blue tones they had designated as family colors, received guests near the altar with that practiced grace that only generations of privileged education bestow. Next to them, Camille held little Miles, dressed in a christening outfit that looked like a family heirloom, elaborately embroidered and clearly costly. George, slightly apart, mechanically greeted the newcomers. His expression was a mask of formality that revealed none of his true feelings. When he saw us approach, I noticed a flash of something. Surprise, discomfort, guilt, briefly cross his face. Mom? Dad, he greeted, leaning in to kiss Eleanor and shake my hand. I'm glad you could make it. We wouldn't miss our grandson's christening for anything in the world, Eleanor replied, her tone kind but firm. Although it seems our presence wasn't considered a priority in the seating arrangements. George had the decency to look uncomfortable. It was the godparents' decision, he explained weakly. They organized the whole ceremony with Mr. Mondell's help. Of course, I replied, not entirely hiding my skepticism. Can we say hello to our grandson? Sure, he responded, guiding us toward where Camille was chatting animatedly with her parents. The contrast between our attire and that of the Mondell family couldn't have been more evident. Our vibrant colors stood out among the uniform blue tones they had adopted, a visual reminder of our refusal to be assimilated into their homogeneous vision of the appropriate family. Camille, George called, interrupting the conversation. My parents want to greet Miles. My daughter-in-law turned, her social smile immediately in place, though I noticed her eyes critically scanning our outfits, registering our deliberate deviation from the established code. Mr. Sterling, Eleanor, she greeted with that superficial courtesy she always used with us. How wonderful that you could join us on this very special day. We wouldn't miss it, Eleanor replied, holding out her arms toward the baby. May I hold him for a moment? I saw the hesitation in Camille, that instant of doubt that revealed how unwelcome our affection for the child was. But with so many eyes watching, she had no choice but to yield. Of course, she replied, carefully handing over Miles. "Just be careful with the christening gown. It's a Mondell family heirloom. It's been in the family for 5 generations." "Impressive," I commented, watching the baby in Eleanor's arms. "The Sterlings also have our family traditions, though perhaps less visible in museum showcases." Mr. Mondell, who had been listening to the conversation, intervened with that condescending tone he reserved especially for me. "Traditions are the pillar of established families, Augustus. They lend continuity and meaning to the generations. I'm sure you have your own, in your own way." "In our way, yes," I replied, maintaining my diplomatic smile. "Traditions like honesty, hard work, unconditional family loyalty, values that aren't always reflected in material objects." An uncomfortable silence followed my comment, barely disguised by the rising chatter in the church. Mr. Mondell, accustomed to dominating any social exchange, seemed momentarily bewildered by my direct response. Mrs. Mondell, ever quick to save face, intervened with her decades-polished social skill. "Speaking of family traditions, did you know that the bishop officiating the ceremony also baptized Camille 30 years ago? He's a close family friend." "What a fortunate coincidence," Eleanor commented, gently rocking Miles, who observed her with dark eyes so similar to George's when he was a baby. "We brought something special for the occasion, a Sterling tradition." "Oh, a gift?" Mrs. Mondell asked with that polite curiosity that never reached her eyes. "You can leave it on the gift table. The event assistant will take care of logging it properly." "It's not just any gift," I corrected. "It's a family inheritance, something every Sterling firstborns has received at their christening for generations." I pulled the small box containing the gold medallion from my pocket, opening it to reveal the antique piece with the Sterling crest engraved in relief. "This medallion originally belonged to my great-grandfather," I explained, aware that several nearby guests were observing with curiosity. "It has been passed down through generations as a symbol of our family history." Camille looked at the medallion with evident confusion, as if she didn't know exactly how to respond to this unexpected gesture. "It's very thoughtful," she finally replied, "but we've already selected the christening jewelry Miles will wear during the ceremony. They are Mondell pieces, of course." "This isn't for the ceremony," I clarified, my voice firm but cordial. "It's a personal legacy, something Miles will keep his entire life as a reminder of who he is and where he comes from both sides of his family." I saw Mr. and Mrs. Mondell exchange glances, clearly uncomfortable with this direct assertion of our presence in the child's life. George, for his part, looked at the medallion with an expression that mixed recognition and something else. Nostalgia, perhaps. Memories of his own childhood, when values like family tradition and mutual respect were unquestionable foundations. "The ceremony is about to begin," Mrs. Mondell announced suddenly, consulting her watch. "We should take our seats." Eleanor reluctantly handed Miles back to Camille, not without first whispering something into the baby's ear that I couldn't hear. I saw my daughter-in-law tighten slightly, but she kept her social smile intact as she moved away with the child toward the group formed by the godparents. As we headed to our assigned seats in the second row, I noticed several guests watching us with barely disguised curiosity. We were the discordant note in this symphony, perfectly orchestrated by the Mondells. The grandparents who didn't wear the designated colors, who didn't occupy the privileged seats, who dared to bring their own traditions to an event where every detail had been meticulously controlled. "Did you see Mr. Mondell's face when you mentioned the medallion?" Eleanor whispered, as we sat down. "He looked like he bit into a lemon." "This is just starting," I replied in a low voice, adjusting the envelope containing the legal notification in the inner pocket of my jacket. "The real message will arrive after the ceremony." The ceremony proceeded with the pompous solemnity one would expect. The bishop, clearly familiar with the Mondells, repeatedly mentioned the distinguished family little Miles was joining, the noble tradition that would now continue through him. Of us, the Sterlings, not a word. It was as if half the child's lineage simply didn't exist, conveniently erased from the official narrative. I observed George throughout the ceremony. He remained slightly apart from Camille, who held the baby surrounded by her parents and the godparents, as if they formed an impenetrable circle. My son seemed uncomfortable, out of place, in what should have been one of the most significant moments of his fatherhood. It was possible he was starting to feel the weight of his own exclusion. When the sacrament concluded, guests began moving toward the church exit, where a fleet of luxury cars waited to transport them to the Willow Creek Country Club for the reception. Eleanor and I deliberately lagged behind, waiting for the opportune moment to execute the next phase of our plan. "Are you sure about this?" Eleanor asked as we watched the crowd disperse. "Once you do it, there'll be no going back." "I'm completely sure," I replied. "It's not about revenge. It's about dignity. It's about reminding everyone, especially George, who we really are." Finally, when most of the guests had already departed, we approached our son, who was supervising the last details with one of the event organizers. "George," I called him, "could we talk privately for a moment?" I saw hesitation cross his face, the quick glance toward where Camille and her parents were waiting at the entrance. "Now isn't a good time, Dad. The guests are already arriving at the club, and I need to—" "It will be brief," I interrupted firmly. "And it is important." Something in my tone must have alerted him to the seriousness of the matter, because he finally nodded, guiding us into a small, deserted side chapel. "What is it?" he asked, subtly consulting his watch. "If it's about the seating in the ceremony, it wasn't my decision. The godparents insisted on—" "It's not about the seating," I interrupted again, pulling the envelope from the inner pocket of my jacket. "It's about this." I handed him the document, watching his reaction intently as he opened it. Initial confusion, then bewilderment. Finally, alarm, as he grasped the meaning of what he was reading. "What? What is this?" he stammered, looking up from the paper. "A complete restructuring? Without consulting me?" "As Director of International Operations, you are being duly notified," I replied with professional calm. "The Board of Directors, that is me, has approved these changes, effective immediately." "But this completely dilutes my authority," he protested, quickly reading the key points of the document. "It turns me into just another executive, subject to constant approval from a board." "Exactly," I confirmed. "Just as you have diluted our presence as grandparents, subjecting us to the constant approval of the Mondells." His face paled at the direct comparison. For the first time, he seemed to truly understand what was happening. "Dad, these are completely different situations. This is a business. The other is family." "Precisely," I completed for him. "And if family can be reorganized for the convenience of a few, why not business?" Eleanor, who had remained silent, intervened with that soft but firm tone she always used in decisive moments. "George, your father and I have respected your decisions for years. Your marriage, your career, your life. Even when we felt you were pulling away from us, from your roots, we never interfered. But there are lines we cannot allow to be crossed." "And what are those lines according to you, Ma?" he asked, a hint of defiance in his voice. "Respect," I replied simply. "I'm not talking about empty formalities or superficial courtesies. I'm talking about genuine recognition of who we are, what we have built, and the values we tried to pass on to you. And you think this," he shook the document in his hand, "will generate that respect, a corporate maneuver on the day of my son's christening?" "No," Eleanor replied with surprising firmness. "Respect isn't generated by maneuvers. It's earned through congruity, through consistent actions, through lived values. Something you apparently forgot when you allowed the Mondells to decide that your own parents didn't deserve to know their grandson had been born. The direct mention of the incident that had triggered everything seemed to visibly impact him. For a moment, it looked like he was going to defend himself, to offer excuses again about how busy they had been. But then something unexpected happened. His posture subtly changed. His shoulders dropped slightly, and in his eyes I saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen in a long time: recognition. "I know," he finally said, his voice barely audible. "You know," I repeated, confused by this turn. "I know I've allowed situations I should never have tolerated," he continued, running a hand over his face in a gesture of deep weariness. "It wasn't conscious at first, but then it became easier to yield than to confront." "Confront what, exactly?" Eleanor pressed softly. "The expectations of the Mondells, of Camille, of the social circle we now move in," he explained. "It's like there are two Georges, the ambitious executive rising in the corporate world, and the son of Augustus and Eleanor Sterling, the boy who grew up valuing honest work and family above all else." A silence fell as we assimilated his words. It wasn't a full apology, but it was something we hadn't seen in years: genuine vulnerability, recognition of an internal dissonance. "And which of those George do you want to be for your son?" I asked finally. The question seemed to hit him hard. He lowered his gaze to the document in his hands. Then he directed it toward the main nave of the church, where minutes earlier his son had been christened. "I don't know," he admitted with surprising honesty. "For so long I thought I could be both, take the best of both worlds. But events like today make me realize I might have been losing something essential in the process." "It's not too late to get it back," Eleanor said, her voice softening. "As long as you truly want to." George looked at us alternately, assessing the sincerity of our words, the real possibility of change. "And this?" he asked finally, holding the document. "Is it definitive?" "As definitive as you want it to be," I replied. "The legal changes are implemented and structurally irrevocable. But your role within that new structure, that can evolve according to your own decisions." "What exactly do you mean?" His tone showed caution, but also genuine interest. "I mean that this restructuring is not intended to punish or exclude you," I explained. It seeks to establish a new order based on real merit, not automatically inherited rights. If you demonstrate through actions that you understand and share the fundamental values of the Sterling Ventures, your influence and participation will grow naturally. And those fundamental values are the same ones we tried to instill in you since childhood," Eleanor interjected. "Honesty, hard work, loyalty, respect for everyone, regardless of their origin or position. And above all, family, true family. Not as an abstract concept or a tool for social status, but as a lived reality every day." Another silence, this one more prolonged. I could almost see the gears turning in my son's mind, evaluating options, consequences, possible paths. "Camilla and her parents won't understand this," he finally said. "For them, changes like this are declarations of family war." "We are not seeking war," I corrected. "We are seeking balance, to remind everyone, including yourself, that being a Sterling means something, that our values and our history deserve respect, not because of surnames or lineage, but because of concrete actions, because of integrity demonstrated over time." The sound of heels echoing on the marble interrupted our conversation. Camille appeared at the chapel entrance, her expression a mixture of impatience and suspicion. "George, everyone is waiting," she announced, her gaze alternating between us and the document in my son's hands. "The guests are asking for the baby's parents." "I'm coming," he replied, carefully folding the paper and tucking it into his pocket. "Just one more moment." Camille hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to her instructions not being immediately obeyed. Finally, with a gesture of resignation, she withdrew, not without shooting us a look that mixed curiosity and suspicion. "I have to go," George said when we were alone again, "but this conversation isn't over." "Of course not," I confirmed. "In fact, it's just beginning." "Will you come to the reception?" he asked, a hint of hope in his voice that surprised me. I exchanged a glance with Eleanor, who nodded slightly. "We'll be there," I confirmed, "but on our own terms, not as mere decorative spectators in the great Mondel production." A fleeting smile, the first genuine one I had seen on his face in a long time, crossed his lips. "I understand," he said simply. When he left, Eleanor and I remained silent for a few moments, assimilating what had happened. "Do you think he truly understands?" she finally asked. "He's starting to," I replied, "and that's more than I expected to achieve today." The reception at the Willow Creek Country Club was exactly as we had imagined. Opulent, perfectly organized, with that air of studied exclusivity the Mondels meticulously cultivated. Uniformed servers circulated with trays of champagne. A string quartet played classical music in a corner, and the guests, the cream of the capital's society, chatted in groups carefully arranged according to their social relevance. Our arrival caused the discreet stir we expected. Several guests observed us with barely disguised curiosity, surely noticing our deliberate deviation from the suggested dress code and wondering exactly what role we played in this meticulously choreographed celebration. Mr. Mondel, always the perfect host despite the circumstances, approached to receive us with that social smile that never reached his eyes. "Augustus, Eleanor, I'm glad you could join the reception," he greeted, guiding us toward a table on the perimeter of the ballroom. "We've reserved a place for you here, with some family friends." The table in question, I immediately noted, was significantly far from the head table, where the Mondels, the godparents, and presumably George and Camille with the baby would sit. Another calculated exclusion. Another subtle reminder of our peripheral position in their vision of the family. "That's very thoughtful," I replied with deliberate ambiguity as I surveyed the ballroom. "But before we sit down, we'd like to personally deliver our gift for Miles." "Of course," Mrs. Mondel interjected, having approached silently. "The gift table is by the entrance. The assistant will log your gift and ensure it reaches Camille and George." "We prefer to deliver it personally," Eleanor insisted with that polite firmness she always employed in tense social situations. "It's a family tradition." Mrs. Mondel exchanged a quick glance with her husband. That silent communication of those who have been together for decades and have perfected the art of handling awkward situations without losing composure. "As you wish," Mr. Mondel finally conceded. "They are at the head table, at the back of the room." We headed there, aware of the gazes following us. The head table, set on a slightly raised platform, as a physical reminder of the social hierarchy, was occupied by the Mondels, the godparents, a prominent politician and his wife, and Camille, who held the baby while chatting animatedly. George, I noted, was not present. "Camille," Eleanor greeted when we reached her, "we wanted to personally give you our gift for Miles." My daughter-in-law looked at us with evident surprise, as if she didn't expect us to dare approach her so directly on her turf. "That's very kind," she finally replied, her breeding prevailing. "You can leave it with the other gifts, and—" "It's not that kind of gift," I interrupted softly, pulling out the album we had prepared. It's something we believe Miles will value when he's older. Something that will help him understand where he comes from, who the Sterlings really are. I handed over the leather-bound volume, watching Camille receive it with evident confusion. She opened it cautiously, her eyes scanning the first pages where we had meticulously documented the humble origins of our family. "It's interesting," she finally commented, her tone trying to conceal what she clearly considered an oddity. "We'll keep it with the ceremony mementos." "It's not a mere memento," Eleanor corrected gently. "It is the history of half of your son's legacy, just as important and valuable as any Mondale genealogy." Mr. Mondale, who had approached to supervise the exchange, intervened with that condescending tone he reserved especially for us. "It's a quaint gesture," he commented, glancing at the album over Camille's shoulder, "although perhaps a bit rustic for the occasion. Children today appreciate contemporary gifts more, don't you think?" "Gifts are forgotten," I replied, maintaining my cordial but firm tone. "Values endure. And that is what this album represents. The values that built the sterling name your grandson now carries, even if it is in second place." An awkward silence followed my comment. Several nearby guests had stopped their conversations, attentive to the exchange that, although civil on the surface, clearly hid deeper tensions. "Dad? Mom?" George's voice interrupted the tense moment. He approached the table with a determined step, an inscrutable expression on his face. "I see you've already delivered your gift." "That's right," I confirmed, observing him intently. "We hope someday you'll share it with Miles, that you'll explain the meaning of every page, every photograph." Something shifted in my son's expression. A resolution, a decision made at that precise instant. "I will," he replied, with a firmness that surprised me. "In fact, there's something I'd like to share with everyone right now." He turned toward the guests, gesturing to capture their attention. Gradually, conversation ceased, and all eyes turned toward him. "I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on this very special day," he began in a clear, confident voice. "The christening of my son Miles represents not only his entry into the Catholic faith, but also his formal incorporation into a family tradition." Mr. Mondale smiled, clearly expecting the usual recognition of the illustrious Mondale history. But what followed left everyone, especially the Mondales, completely surprised. "A tradition that includes two equally valuable lineages," George continued. "On one side, the distinguished Mondale family, with their long history in banking and finance. And on the other, the Sterling family, built from the ground up by my father, Augustus Sterling, who started as a poor son in West Philadelphia, and, through tireless work, honesty, and vision, built a business group that today employs more than 500 American families." A murmur rippled through the ballroom. The Mondales' faces revealed a mixture of disbelief and barely contained indignation. Camille, in particular, looked at my son as if he had suddenly started speaking an incomprehensible language. "Both traditions," George continued, unperturbed, "will contribute fundamental values to my son's formation. From the Mondales, I hope he learns refinement, strategic vision, and an appreciation for history. From the Sterlings, I hope he incorporates the work ethic, unbreakable integrity, and the courage to forge his own path, regardless of his origin." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room until it settled on Eleanor and me. "And today, I want to announce something important. In recognition of these two traditions uniting in my son, Camille and I have decided that his legal name will be Miles Sterling Mondale, honoring the American tradition where the paternal surname precedes the maternal." The surprise was total. Camille looked physically struck by the announcement, her face cycling through various shades as she tried to process what she had just heard. Mr. and Mrs. Mondell exchanged looks of absolute consternation, clearly trying to understand how they had lost control of the situation so abruptly. This decision, George concluded, reflects our commitment to equality and mutual respect between both families, recognizing that our son will be heir to two equally worthy legacies. He raised his glass in a toast, forcing everyone present to do the same out of sheer social courtesy. To Miles Sterling Mondell, and to the two families now united through him. The entire room drank, although many faces, especially at the head table, reflected evident discomfort. When conversations resumed, George approached us, a mixture of nervousness and determination on his face. "It wasn't planned," he confessed in a low voice. "But after our conversation in the church, after reading the document, I understood that I had to take a stand, that I couldn't continue in this limbo, trying to please everyone, and ending up being untrue to anyone." "Is Camille aware?" Eleanor asked, looking toward where my daughter-in-law was speaking heatedly with her parents, agitated gestures indicating an intense discussion. "No," George admitted. "It will be a difficult conversation, but a necessary one. I've spent too long allowing the Mondells to determine every aspect of our family life. It won't be easy," I warned, conscious of the power dynamics that had operated in his marriage for years. "They are accustomed to imposing their vision." "I know," he replied, a new resolve in his voice. "But I also know that I can no longer live divided between two worlds, ashamed of my origins, allowing my son to grow up ignoring half of his heritage." At that moment, watching my son finally face a truth he had been evading for years, I felt a mix of pride and hope I hadn't experienced in a long time. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked, ever practical. "Honest conversations," George replied. "With Camille first, then with the Mondells, and with you, too. There is a lot to rebuild, many bridges to repair." "We'll be here," I assured, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Not to impose, but to support, as it has always been, even if we all sometimes forgot it." The following days and weeks would be complex, filled with tensions and delicate negotiations. The corporate restructuring would continue its course, establishing new balances of power and responsibility. George's marriage would face difficult tests as he and Camille renegotiated the terms of their relationship, not just as a couple, but as parents of a child who now officially carried the Sterling name first. But as I watched my grandson sleep peacefully in his cradle, oblivious to the adult complexities surrounding him, I felt a deep certainty. It had been worth it. Every uncomfortable moment, every difficult confrontation, everything had been necessary to restore something fundamental we had almost lost. Respect. Not superficial respect based on surnames or social positions, but the deep respect founded on lived values, on authenticity, on mutual recognition of the inherent dignity of every person. "He's beautiful," Eleanor commented, approaching to gaze at the baby too. "He has your eyes and your determination," I replied, watching his small fists clench and unclench rhythmically in his sleep. "He'll be a true Sterling," she corrected gently. "A Sterling Mondell with the best of both worlds, if we all do our part correctly." "With the best of both worlds," I repeated, savoring the truth in those words, because in the end, I discovered it wasn't about winning a family barter struggle or imposing our vision over the Mondells. It was about something much more fundamental, ensuring my grandson grew up knowing his complete history, valuing his roots in all their complexity, understanding that true nobility doesn't come from ancient surnames, but from honorable actions, honest work, and unbreakable integrity. I arrived at my son's house unannounced and discovered his baby had been born without my knowledge. But instead of walking away wounded, I decided to face the situation with dignity and determination. And in the process, I not only reclaimed my place as a grandfather, but helped my own son remember who he really was, where he came from, and what values founded his existence. Because, ultimately, genuine respect is never demanded. It is earned day by day with every consistent action, with every value demonstrated in difficult moments. And as I contemplated my incomplete, imperfect family, finally heading toward authenticity, I knew we had taken the first step in a new chapter, one where every part of our story would have the space and dignity it deserved. Little Miles Sterling Mondell would grow up knowing exactly who he was and where he came from. And that, perhaps, was the most important victory of all. You know, life has a funny way of teaching us that blood alone doesn't make a family. It's love, respect, and how we treat each other that truly matter. I've learned that you should never let anyone make you feel small, no matter who they are. Dignity isn't about shouting, it's about staying calm, standing tall, and doing what's right, even when it hurts. Real strength isn't only in fighting, it's in letting go of what hurts you and moving on with an open heart. Maybe one day, my son will understand that true greatness isn't about wealth or status, but about how you treat the people who raised you. And I hope my grandson will grow up knowing that everything I did came from love, not pride. If you feel the same way and liked my story, hit that like button. Let's see how many of us are out there. I'd love to know what city you're watching from and what time it is. Tell me in the comments. If you'd like to support my journey, you can send a small donation. Thank you for listening and sharing your time with me. For more life stories like this, check out the other videos on my channel and subscribe. I've added 2 new stories on the screen that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Click on one and start watching. With love,